Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome back to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm your host, Steve Taylor, and tonight's tale explores the terrifying weight of memory and the rituals we carry in silence. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't what lurk in the shadows, but what we preserve, what we protect, what we polish and stack neatly in the attic or the basement and tell ourselves is just old junk. But tradition has teeth, and family doesn't always let go. Before we begin, a reminder, if our stories haunt your thoughts or keep you checking corners at night, help keep the horrors coming. Leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune in. Watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss the next tale. Craving even more? Visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com. Become a patron for just $7.99 a month or less with an annual plan, and you'll gain early access to episodes, ad-free listening, and exclusive content crafted for our most fearless fans. And be sure to join our growing legion of listeners on Facebook, Instagram, and X, where it's always spooky season. Now, dim the lights, draw the curtains, and let's begin. Tonight's tale is brought to you courtesy of our partners at Velox Books. That's Velox Books.com, an independent publisher with a decade-long passion for chilling, weird, and captivating horror fiction. Their authors include top-voted no-sleep writers, Amazon bestsellers, and some of the darkest minds working in short-form horror today. And speaking of which, tonight's story is by R.K. KOMBRINCK, an author, artist, and musician from Cincinnati, Ohio. KOMBRINCK is also the creator of the psychedelic rock project, The Obliging Victims. And when he's not being spooky, you'll find him out adventuring with his wife Elise and their cadre of animal friends. In tonight's tale, a college student volunteering for extra credit discovers that the worst thing about helping someone clean house is what they choose to keep. Some family traditions never die, and some masks should never be taken off. Performed for you this evening by Geoff Sturtevant, a talented published author, frequent contributor to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a gifted voice actor in his own right. You may also recognize him as the host of our Wednesday night episodes. Without further ado, I present to you Mrs. Lumley's Masks by R.K. KOMBRINCK.
The dining room table must have been beautiful when it was new. It was made from good, solid oak and had to weigh upwards of 200 pounds. The legs were stout and immovable, and the beveled top was inlaid with a rich cherry panel. Chrissy thought you could probably drop a bowling ball on this table and it wouldn't tremble, even a little bit. Only the scratches and gouges that crisscrossed its surface betrayed its age and use. She wondered how many generations of dinnerware must have been dragged across it to have left such deep, ugly grooves. "Would you like some more coffee, honey?" Mrs. Lumley smiled across the scarred table at her. Chrissy smiled back and shook her head, her ponytail bobbing from side to side. "Oh, no thanks." She patted her empty mug. "I'm all set." "All righty." The old woman slowly stood from her chair with a groan. "Then I guess we should go ahead and get started. What do you say?" "Sounds good to me." Chrissy bounced to her feet as the old woman shuffled out of the dining room and into the shadowy front hallway. Their footfalls echoed off the granite-tiled floor. "So, Mrs. Lumley, when does your sister actually move in?" Mrs. Lumley tottered past the front door to the other end of the hall, where a staircase huddled against the far wall. She stopped at the newel post, which was nearly 3 inches taller than she was, and turned to look back at Chrissy. "She'll be coming this evening." With a grunt, she heaved herself onto the first step. "Later today, I'm having the medical supply people come in and install one of those motorized chairs that go up and down the steps." She continued up the stairs, waiting till both feet were on a riser before ascending to the next. The old wood creaked and sighed with every step. "I'd love to have one for myself, even though I'm sure having to do all this walking has kept the rigor mortis away." She cackled and went on. "Come on now," Chrissy mock scolded. "None of that rigor mortis talk. You're still a young lady." She was climbing right behind Mrs. Lumley, forced to adopt the old woman's gait. Step, step, wait. Step, step, wait. She'd begun to feel a burble in her stomach, which was unsurprising considering the strong coffee she'd just had. She knew she would probably need to use the restroom soon and willed the old woman to move faster. They finally stepped into the upstairs hallway, darker even than the one below. Only the gray autumn daylight spilling through windows at either end of the hall gave any illumination. It fell through the spindles of the second-floor railing, spotlighting the dust-covered strands of old spider webs. There were 4 rooms upstairs, all with old-fashioned paneled doors, each one closed except for a bathroom at the far right end. The walls were painted a dark brown with ornate crown molding along the ceiling. The molding had probably been a gleaming white once, but now, like everything else in the house, was dark with grime. The 2 women padded along the carpet, and Chrissy looked around, her heart breaking a little at the sad state of neglect that had befallen a lovely home. She told herself that after helping Mrs. Lumley get these upstairs rooms clean, she would work on the rest of the house as well. She wanted the elderly sisters to finish out their time together in clean, pleasant surroundings. Mrs. Lumley stopped at the last door to the left of the stairway. "This is going to be Ginny's room." She turned the cut glass knob and shoved her weight against the door. It popped open with a wooden shriek. She stepped inside and Chrissy followed. The room was large, the wallpaper covered with vertical lines of dark blue leaves running from floor to ceiling. A window at the back of the room looked out, presumably onto the backyard. It was hard to say for sure what it looked out on because a wall of junk stood between it and anyone who might want to look out of it. This junk blockade wound its way into the center of the room where it crumpled into a loose pile of debris. Cardboard boxes overflowed with papers and photographs. A small hutch piled high with costume jewelry, makeup kits, and compacts, crouched below a gilt-edged mirror. Several different kinds of lamps had been shoved into corners, and towers of stacked books leaned against the walls. 2 different bureaus held many years' worth of magazines, and there was an old writing desk that looked like it may have been used by Depression-era school children. Chrissy let her gaze sweep from one side of the room to the other, trying not to be overwhelmed, but her face gave away her apprehension. Mrs. Lumley saw this, and her eyes fell with shame. "Yes, sir, this is quite a mess. I don't know why I let it get so bad in here." She picked her way over odds and ends to a straight-backed wooden chair that was partially hidden under some discarded drapes. She pushed the curtains aside and sat down. "After Gordon died, I just started putting things in here that I couldn't find a place for anymore. I don't think I ever expected to need this room again." "It's not that bad," Chrissy lied. Her thoughts were more honest. This is going to suck so bad. Some of this stuff looks really heavy and my head's starting to hurt. She wanted to ask for an Advil or aspirin, but didn't want Mrs. Lumley to have to go all the way back downstairs to get one. She decided to just try and fight through it and get the job done. "Where are we going with all of it?" "Well," Mrs. Lumley looked around at her belongings sadly. "A lot of it will go in the trash." "Oh, are you sure?" Chrissy felt a flutter of distress. She didn't feel good about helping an old lady throw her memories away. "Yes, quite sure." Mrs. Lumley managed to paste a smile on her quivering lips. "I don't need most of this old junk. Anything I keep will go in the next room over, with the masks." Chrissy wasn't sure she'd heard that last part right. "The masks?" Mrs. Lumley looked up, her false smile suddenly becoming genuine. "I forgot to tell you about my collection, didn't I?" She hopped up from her chair and scrambled through the maze of junk to the door. Her sudden flurry of movement caught Chrissy off guard. Since coming up the stairs, Mrs. Lumley had seemed very frail and slow. Now she scuttled around the room like an agile crab. "Come on, I haven't had anyone to show this to in a while." She stepped out into the hallway and Chrissy followed. "Actually, you can get started clearing some space in this room while I decide what few things I want to keep." Mrs. Lumley made her way to the next door down. "That will keep you from having to stand around watching an old lady cry." Chrissy reached out and put her hand on Mrs. Lumley's shoulder, giving it a very light squeeze. "Mrs. Lumley, I'm so sorry. Maybe there's somewhere we can just move your stuff to so you don't have to get rid of it. Maybe we can store it in the basement?" The old woman reached back and tapped Chrissy's hand with her own. She leaned against the closed door and turned to face Chrissy. "No, dear. I'm afraid the basement is already full. Besides, it's time I let go of some things. Ginny deserves to come into a comforting environment. She's been through so much." She leaned on the doorknob, turning it. "All that clutter would just keep me from taking good care of her. I've looked out for her since we were young. We lost our parents at an early age, you know." A lump formed in Chrissy's throat. "You're such a good person, Mrs. Lumley. Such a good sister." Mrs. Lumley's smile turned wistful. "Well, like I said, she's been through a lot." She pushed open the door and, with Chrissy close behind, stepped into the room. Chrissy felt her jaw wanting to drop open and clamped it shut, working harder to control her expression this time. Her headache intensified, and she felt a tremor of dizziness as she took in the strange scene before her. The room itself was as large as the one next to it, maybe even slightly larger, with the same window looking out from the back wall. There was no furniture in this room, no chairs or tables or wardrobes or dressers. There were only masks, hundreds of them, maybe 1,000. Mrs. Lumley hadn't bothered with the display racks or cases for her collection, simply sprawled where it liked. The walls were hidden behind drifts and dunes of masks piled up against them. They spilled out into the center of the room. Empty eye sockets beyond counting, staring up at Chrissy from every corner with indifference. What do you think, honey? Aren't they nice? Mrs. Lumley slipped her arm around Chrissy. Chrissy just nodded politely, pretending to like what she saw. There were masks of all kinds. She saw beautiful masquerade-style masks, bedazzled with sequins and feathers, mounted on sticks. She saw the huge furry face of some nameless creature hanging from the wall, its mouth agape, its round black eye holes wide as if with shock. There were eye masks, like the Lone Ranger's, scattered around the edge of the collection. There were elastic strings tangled and bunched. In a pile near the door were some cheap plastic masks. Pigs, cows, cats, babies, clowns, painted in grotesque pastels with rosy cheeks and red mouths. Rubber monster masks glared and bared their molded fangs from spots around the heap. All these masks, and many more besides, filled the room as if a dump truck had come in, dropped them, and left. Mrs. Lumley walked into the center of the room, smiling at the masks that gazed up at her from the floor. I've been collecting these since I was a little girl. Halloween was always my favorite holiday. Ginny's too. I liked pretending to be someone else. She looked over at Chrissy. You do things differently when you pretend you're someone else. You feel free to be whoever you are on the inside, while you're wearing a mask on the outside. The old woman leaned forward and picked up a papier-mâché mask from the pile. It was gray, with tiny plastic leaves glued to the cheeks and brow. A long, beak-like nose protruded from between the two gaping eye holes, and black feathers sprouted across the forehead. This one belonged to my friend Evelyn. She turned it this way and that, gazing at it fondly. She would wear these with these long pink rubber gloves that went all the way up to her elbow. She always looked marvelous. She set it back down and picked up another one, a grotesque, white furry bunny mask with a pink nose and huge buck teeth. It was meant to be pulled down completely over the wearer's head. Gordon, Mr. Lumley, used to wear this one. Mrs. Lumley's eyes narrowed mischievously. For all kinds of different occasions. She held it up to her face and rubbed its rubber nose against her own, giggling. I always like how the fur tickled. She tossed it back with the others and continued picking up masks at random, giving bits of their history to Chrissy. Chrissy felt the mute scrutiny of all the eyeless faces surrounding her, and it felt cold. She didn't really want to be left alone in this room to clear out space. It was creepy. She was also not feeling very well. Her roommate had the flu, and Chrissy was afraid she'd caught it, despite all her efforts to wash her hands and keep her distance. She wished there was at least a chair in the room where she could sit and rest. She began wondering how silly it would look if she were to just plop down cross-legged on the floor. No matter how much worse she felt, though, Chrissy was going to have to stick this out and finish assisting Mrs. Lumley. Above and beyond her wish to be helpful, Chrissy wanted the extra credit this volunteer assignment would earn her for psych class. It would bump her grade up from a high C to a low B. If she maintained high grades this semester, her parents would pay for her to go to London in the spring. Awash in her own thoughts, Chrissy lost the thread of Mrs. Lumley's conversation. Realizing that the old woman had paused, Chrissy nodded her head vigorously, hoping it was appropriate to what was being said. You see, Mrs. Lumley returned Chrissy's nod. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, of course. Chrissy had no idea what she was agreeing with, but it hardly seemed to matter. Her nausea was getting worse. That's why you have to value your friends, Mrs. Lumley went on. Mr. Lumley and I had such a wonderful group of friends. We would throw these little dinner parties, and everyone would come over and play games. Oh, how we loved games. Even though Ginny was 10 years younger, we would let her play with us. It made her feel very grown up. We'd play charades, password, grease and lasso, and darn the dunce. And of course, everyone would put on masks. A lot of these, she swept her arm around the room, belonged to our friends. I kept them as the years went on. You're never too old to have a good time. That's a good attitude. Chrissy blinked her eyes rapidly. They'd gone blurry for a moment. Mrs. Lumley seemed to suddenly notice the young woman's discomfort. Sweetheart, you're looking kind of green around the gills. Her face scrunched with concern. Are you feeling all right? Chrissy waved her hand dismissively. I'm fine. I've just got a little cold or something. Don't worry about me. Nonsense. Mrs. Lumley patted the girl on her arm and shuffled past her. I'm going to go down to the kitchen and get you a Tylenol and a glass of water. You wait here. Chrissy shook her head. No, Mrs. Lumley, you don't have to do that. I can go get it myself if you tell me where. Mrs. Lumley held up a stern finger. Shush now. You wait here. You're the sick one. You're the one here to help us. The least I can do is get you a pill and a drink of water. And with that, she was out the door and headed down the stairs. The moment the old woman was out of sight, Chrissy crumpled to the floor, stretching her legs out in front of her. She leaned back on her hands and looked around at the masks. They seemed to be crowding past each other, eager to look at the girl who had stupidly allowed herself to be left alone with them. She was suddenly afraid of being buried beneath an avalanche of painted latex, plastic, plaster, and fur. Grinning mouths and empty eyes leered at her with predatory contempt. Fuck you. Chrissy did not hear the slur in her voice. I'm not afraid of you guys. They mocked her with their silence. We think you are. She could almost hear them whisper. Chrissy rolled over onto her knees, crawled to the corner of the room, and grabbed up a cheap plastic Frankenstein mask. Look, I'll put one on. How scared am I now? She sat up and crossed her legs like a preschooler getting ready for story time. She slipped the mask over her head, pulling the elastic band around and under her ponytail. The molded interior pressed uncomfortably against her cheeks, lips, and eyes. Her breath was loud inside the mask and blew back at her. It smelled musty. The eye holes didn't line up with her eyes very well, and she had to adjust it to see properly. Now Chrissy was Frankenstein's monster. She looked around the room at the other masks. No reason to be afraid now. What did Frankenstein's mother have to fear? She grinned widely, the plastic scraping against her face. She giggled, the sound of it rattling behind the mask. She was too dizzy to stand up, too tired. Instead, she leaned her head over to examine the corner from where she'd pulled the Frankenstein mask. It seemed to have already been cleared out somewhat. Pressed back against the wall, hidden in the shadows of the mask mountain, Chrissy saw a wooden box with a hinged lid. It was the size of a backgammon case. She crawled in a little closer and reached back with one hand, leaning on the other. She slid the box over to herself, sat up, and hoisted the box onto her lap. From somewhere below, out in the house, she thought she heard Mrs. Lumley talking to someone, but she didn't care. She was overcome with curiosity about what might be inside the wooden case. There was no lock, so Chrissy gently lifted the lid. The first thing Chrissy found was what looked like a folded paper cone. She pulled it out and held it up, opening up the round bottom. It had the word dunce stenciled on it. She looked at it for a minute and then tossed it to the floor. It was becoming hard to think. She was getting sleepy. Her mouth stretched behind the mask as she yawned. Beneath the paper cone, dunce cap, it's called a dunce cap, was a thin leather wallet. Chrissy opened it and found that it held several long pins topped with shiny round heads. They looked very sharp. She set the wallet next to the dunce cap. Under the wallet, Chrissy found a collection of old Polaroid photos. Her eyes got very big as she flipped through them. Some of the pictures were of people in masks. Many of them showed a young girl, younger even than Chrissy. In all of them, the girl was tied to a familiar straight-backed chair set on top of a scarred but beautiful oak table. The girl was wearing the dunce cap. In some of them, that's all she was wearing. Chrissy's heart began to beat very fast. The people in masks were doing things to the girl. She shoved the photos back in the box and closed it. She looked up and around the room. The masks no longer seemed to be watching her. It was as if they were looking away, giving her privacy. Chrissy opened the case back up and started looking at pictures again. The first few photos were close-ups of the young girl's face, showing how her lips had been pinned shut. Lines of blood, black in the harsh glare of the flash, spilled down over her chin. Her eyes were haunted, but not surprised. It's just fake, Chrissy thought wildly. These people like costumes. It's fake blood. The pins are a makeup trick. She looked down at the wallet full of pins on the floor next to her. She flipped over some of the pictures to look at the backs. There were dates on them. 5/5/65, 7/4/65, 7/19/65, 8/11/65, 10/31/65. That last one was very bad. Chrissy almost didn't understand what the man in the smiling fox mask was doing to the girl. Then she held it to the side and realized what he had in his hand and what he was using it for. Chrissy gasped, and her eyes welled with tears at the dead expression on the girl's face. It was an expression that said, "I've been through this before, and I will go through this again." They had taken the pins out of her mouth in that picture. In the next picture, dated that same Halloween night, Chrissy saw why and gagged behind her Frankenstein mask. The photos went on and on. The dates on the back kept spinning out. People in masks capered in the background. When the lower halves of their faces were visible, Chrissy could see that they were laughing at the girl tied to the chair, propped up on the dining room table from downstairs. Chrissy shoved the photos back in the box. She was disgusted and frightened, but she was also very sleepy now. She wanted to just push the box back into its corner and lie down. Somewhere, far back in her addled mind, a voice cried out against this. "You need to get up," this voice insisted. "You need to get out of this house." Chrissy slumped forward instead, resting her chin in her cupped palms. Her eyes drooped. She was not going to be able to stay awake much longer. She wondered what had become of the masked people and the girl in the photos. Dead, probably, she thought. All dead. Her eyelids dipped shut. "I like your mask." At the sound of Mrs. Lumley's voice in the doorway, Chrissy's head snapped up and her eyes flew open. For a moment, she was completely awake. She looked at the old woman, and a scream caught in her throat. Mrs. Lumley's head had somehow grown larger and fatter. Her flesh hung from her cheeks and neck in smooth, pale dewlaps, and her hair had turned brown. It was shiny, like newly burnt skin. It took Chrissy a few moments to realize that Mrs. Lumley was wearing a mask, a grotesquely exaggerated rubber Ronald Reagan mask. The old woman kicked up her feet in a merry little jig, her Reagan mask jostling on her neck. "It's fun to play pretend, isn't it?" Chrissy felt more tears spill sluggishly from her eyes, but her terror was already being numbed again by exhaustion. It occurred to her that the coffee she'd had earlier must have been drugged. Her last thought before falling into darkness was of the girl in the photographs. Chrissy awoke very suddenly. One moment she was lost in oblivion, drifting through an oily scum of nightmares. The next moment she was awake, her dreams unremembered. She lifted her head and looked out into the front hallway of the first floor. It was very dark out there. Night had fallen. The lights in the dining room were glowing above her. Mrs. Lumley finally decided to turn them on, it seemed. She tried to stand and realized she couldn't. She looked down at herself and found that she'd been tied to the straight-back chair from the first room upstairs. An object had toppled from her head during her struggles and landed on the ground. It was the dunce cap. She tried to suck in a deep breath with which to scream and discovered her mouth had been sealed shut with duct tape. Her breath began whistling in and out of her flared nostrils. Someone had dragged her downstairs, brought the chair down after her, and tied her to it, leaving her in front of the dining room table. Mrs. Lumley couldn't have done any of that. Who else was here? As if she'd heard Chrissy's thought, Mrs. Lumley materialized out of the shadows of the hallway like a ghost. She still had on her Ronald Reagan mask. "You're heavier than you look." Mrs. Lumley's voice held the same friendly lilt that it had all through their visit. For a moment, Chrissy grasped at the idea that she'd passed out from the flu, and this was all a horrible dream. But the stiffness in her bound arms and legs, especially in her ankles, pulled back and lashed to the chair, was too convincing. She gave up on the dream idea immediately. "Good thing I'm stronger than I look. You might have some bumps and bruises, though. I'm sorry about that. I had to drag you." Mrs. Lumley picked up the dunce cap and reset it on Chrissy's head. She walked back to the doorway between the dining room and kitchen and turned the corner. Chrissy heard a chain being unlatched and a heavy door being pulled open. She began struggling furiously. "It's time, sweetie. Come on up." Mrs. Lumley called down the stairway on the other side of the wall. A moment later, Chrissy heard an odd mechanical buzzing sound. It went on for a good 30 seconds and then stopped with a loud click. Mrs. Lumley whispered something to someone, and then 2 sets of footsteps made their way into the dining room. One set was Mrs. Lumley's, careful but energetic. The other, a slow shuffling that filled Chrissy with dread. "I'm sorry I couldn't put her up on the table like the old days. It was tough enough getting her down here. And besides, we wouldn't be able to get her up there now anyway." The old woman chirped laughter and was answered by a low, reedy moan. Mrs. Lumley was standing in front of Chrissy again, her eyes glittering behind her hideous mask. She held something in her hand that was too small for Chrissy to see. The old woman beckoned to the person standing just behind the chair, and Chrissy's eyes rolled wildly. She screamed against the tape over her mouth, knowing it was useless, but unable to stop. Slowly, Mrs. Lumley's companion straggled around the dining room table and into view. It was another woman. she somehow looked both older and younger than Mrs. Lumley. She had long, stringy hair, iron gray with streaks of white. The skin on her face was lined and loose. A ring of ugly scars puckered her mouth around the lips. She leaned in close to get a good look at Chrissy. Her eyes were dull, but hiding within was a hollow glint of recognition and dark amusement. Suddenly, Chrissy realized she knew those haunted eyes. From the Polaroid she'd seen earlier that day, the girl was 46 years younger, but still recognizable as the only one in the pictures without a mask. Mrs. Lumley passed the small item she was holding into the twisted hand of the other woman. "You remember how this goes? Remember last time? Won't it be nice to do this up here now thanks to your chairlift?" The other woman didn't answer. She just stared into Chrissy's terrified face. "It'll be almost like old times, except now it's your turn." Mrs. Lumley stepped behind Chrissy and laid her hands on the younger woman's shoulders. The other old woman stepped closer and held the item up to her face. It was the wallet full of pins. She opened it and drew one out. Mrs. Lumley leaned down and spoke into Chrissy's ear. "I'm going to take the tape off your mouth now. If you start screaming or squirming, she's going to drive those pins straight into your gums, and you won't like that a bit. Do you understand?" Chrissy nodded her head, and Mrs. Lumley pulled a corner of the tape away. "If you stay very, very still, I think it won't hurt so badly." The old woman chuckled. "Of course, I don't really know. I've never been the dunce." She pulled the tape the rest of the way off, and Chrissy drew in a deep, shuddering breath. She didn't scream. "Okay, Ginny, time to start. I've got all the other things back here on the table. We'll have to cut her pants away. We won't be able to untie her like we did with you." Mrs. Lumley patted Chrissy on the arm. Ginny reached out her hand, the pin poised between her first and second fingers like a pen, and grasped Chrissy's chin. Her ruined mouth began to twitch. She was trying to smile. Suddenly, Mrs. Lumley's hands came away from Chrissy's shoulders, and she hurried around to Ginny's side. "Mustn't forget this. You can't play without this." She pulled a shiny plastic mask down over Ginny's face. It was a pink, smiling baby mask. "There. Now you're ready." Mrs. Lumley backed away, and Ginny took Chrissy's chin again in her rough, gnarled fingers. She took the pin in her other hand and pressed it against Chrissy's upper lip. "Just like you wanted, Virginia," Mrs. Lumley said soothingly from over her sister's shoulder. "After all these years, you get to darn the dunce."
That was Mrs. Lumley's Masks, written by R.K. Kombrink and performed by Geoff Sturtevant. Tradition can be comforting, it can be ceremonial, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a script, one passed down not just through stories but through pain. The scariest thing, sometimes those who were hurt most become the ones who carry on the ritual. R.K. Kombrink is a name to remember, and not just for the nightmares. In addition to his work as a horror author, he's also a visual artist and the mind behind the psychedelic rock project, The Obliging Victims. He hails from Cincinnati, Ohio, where he explores the outer limits of terror and creativity alike. If you enjoyed tonight's story, check out his latest collection, These Lovely Places, 23 stories of horror and the supernatural. Available now on Amazon from our friends at Velox Books. You can find it at Amazon.com or by searching the title, quote, stories that are guaranteed to entertain, unquote, says Double Shot Reviews. Inside, you'll find tales of haunted woods, sinister imaginary friends, viral plagues that won't stay buried, and things that slip down chimneys best left sealed. Whether you're a longtime fan or new to KOMBRINCK'S world of unsettling fiction, These Lovely Places is a must-read for fans of supernatural terror, eerie twists, and the uncanny lurking just beyond the mundane. And remember, to discover more authors like KOMBRINCK and stories like this one, visit veloxbooks.com. That's VELOX books.com. If tonight's tale had you glancing over your shoulder or suddenly feeling uneasy around old family heirlooms, help us keep the nightmares alive by supporting Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Drop us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It lets us know you're out there watching with us, listening in the dark. Want more tales like Mrs. Lumley's Masks and want them early, ad-free, and uninterrupted? Visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com and become a patron today. For just $7.99 a month or less with an annual plan, you'll gain access to a growing library of exclusive horror, bonus content, and early release episodes, all crafted to keep the shivers coming. And don't be a stranger. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and X for behind-the-scenes content, creator spotlights, and more ghoulish goodness delivered right to your feed. I'm your host, Steve Taylor, and it's been a pleasure to once again guide you through the fog. Until next time, turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listeners. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.